Chapter 29. I opened my eyes and blinked several times. Scar patted my shoulder. Mikhail will not fail you, he said as he took the vial from my hand. You may go, Scar said, and I nodded my head as I walked away. I walked as fast as I could out of the dungeons, ignoring the whimpers and screams of the people Maddox locked up in here. It was not surprising, every pack has its secrets. Once I was out in the forest, I immediately decided to go for a quick walk. I would shift if I could, but I couldn't. It was another reminder of something I've now lost. As I walked through the forest, I still felt the thrum of every little thing. It was different from hearing everything and focusing as a wolf. It was like constantly feeling a pull towards my body. Alaire? Maddox's mind linked. Yeah, I asked. We're having a meeting in the conference room. I need you here, he said. I'll be right there, I replied. Seems like he decided to go back into his hellhole, Hilary said with a sigh. And I raised an eyebrow as she drew a circle on the large map placed on the round table. We gathered inside as a group consisting of me, Maddox, Hilary, Mikhail, Scar, Colt, and the other pack leaders like Carson, Trevor, and Naomi. If that were the case, he would have resumed his business up north, Colt added. It seems more like Faustus relocated. None of his squadrons were in their usual locations and not a single leader was found, Mikhail said. I raised my eyebrows. Squadron? I can vouch for that. His overseas locations were empty last time I checked. I didn't find a single mongrel to interrogate either, Colt added. Mongrel? I asked and Colt smirked. Squadron leaders, he replied, and I felt my stomach drop. I didn't think I've ever told Maddox or anyone else, and I certainly felt the need to tell them now. What's wrong? Maddox asked, and I sighed as everyone's gaze fell on me. Squadrons 1 through 7, do you know anything about them? I asked, and Colt turned his gaze to Maddox and Hilary. Yeah, I've had a couple of run-ins with them and caught a few of the member mutts. I threw them into the dungeons last summer. They're probably still there. Squadron 1 is Faustus' leading sector. They are hard to find, and I've yet to catch anyone from it alive. Why were you asking? Colt asked. I can't recall much about Faustus, but I know that Squadrons 2 and 4 were relocated a few months back to Europe and Russia. Squadron 3 is in Siberia. Either way, it doesn't matter since most of the time they mix up the numbers and change them to make sure no one knew which one was where. As for a Squadron 1 member, consider this your first time meeting a live one, I said as the room went silent. What? You didn't see that coming? I asked, and Colt shook his head before laughing. I thought your squadron meant the circle of allies in the east. That's what your dad told me, Maddox commented, and Hilary shook her head. Stupid mistake on our part. Those packs are bound by family ties to each other. Blood Moon is no different. Eleanor's bloodline could be traced to the Silver Pack, a once-long member of those allied packs, Hilary added. Alaire, we were investigating Blood Moon to locate Squadron 1, Maddox said quietly, and I felt the atmosphere in the room tense up. Our trackers found no one, but we tracked down Faustus' mistress sent back. In your territory, Ian said, and I raised an eyebrow. Aunt Eleanor? I asked, and Hilary nodded. Her body was never found, Alaire. The chances of her being revived aren't slim. By any means, not if Faustus bound her to someone. She's too important for him to lose, she said, and I looked around the room. I immediately pulled my phone out of my pocket. What are you doing? Maddox asked, and I shook my head as I dialed Ender's number. He picked up almost immediately. Hey, haven't talked to you in a WJ. Ender. When was the last time Aunt Eleanor contacted you? I asked. Okay. I miss you too, Ender said with a sigh. Last time was the day before you got here. Did Mother tell you anything? Father? I asked. Mother doesn't know much about Aunt Eleanor, remember? She only contacts us when she sends you back to Blood Moon. Father doesn't contact her unless it's an emergency situation so that we can have the squadron sent to our territory, Ender continued. Is that so? Hey Ender, do you think I can come for a quick visit? Asked. Alaire, Maddox began, but I held a hand up. Of course, the pack has missed you, Ender excitedly said. Great, but before that, tell Reed that I need his help. Oh, and remember that woman I told you about. The woman that makes your bullets? Ender asked. Yeah, her. Contact her for me and send in an order. There's something I need to do. I'll be there by tomorrow afternoon, I said quickly before hanging up. I looked around and found everyone staring at me. Chances are you were investigating Blood Moon because of something important. I have to go check it out. I'm the only one who knows where the squadron checkpoint for Blood Moon is. I explained. Damn it. Okay then. Will you leave tonight? Maddox asked. Tomorrow. Are you coming with me? I asked Maddox. He nodded and looked over at Jasper, who gave him a smirk. It's only normal for both the Alpha and Luna to go, right? We wouldn't want any past admirers to get to her now, would we? Jasper said, and almost everyone smiled. Except for Scar, who never ever seemed to smile. Alynna, Mikhail will join you on this trip. He's better at finding Faustus than anyone else. Scar will stay with me. We will use our own connections to find out more, Hilary said, and I nodded my head. Sounds good, I said before we began discussing the plans. Leaving a pack wasn't easy by any means. We had to make sure everything would still run safe and sound. Once we were done with those discussions, Maddox and I headed off to bed. What was your life like in the squadron? Maddox asked me. Hell, I respond quickly. Okay, Maddox mumbled, and I chuckled as I turned to face him on the bed. You saw a glimpse of it before. It was dark. You're told to kill anyone if they order you to. Sometimes if you break an oath, you're sent to the dungeons and you're left in isolation overnight, I said, swallowing a dry lump in my throat. They made you cling to something, then they separate you from it. In my case, I clung onto my family, and goddess knows how much they used that to their advantage. Those who come to the squadron with nothing to lose would most likely be broken mentally. That way they don't betray the system. Have you ever? Maddox quietly asked, and I paused for a moment. He was obviously asking about breaking. I don't know, I said. Maddox and I had traveled with Mikhail for just about half a day before we finally touched down on Blood Moon territory. My brother stood excitedly, waiting to greet me. Alynna, Ender yelled as he wrapped his arms around me. I laughed as I embraced him as well. Long time no see, I muttered, and Ender squeezed me before letting me go. I was beginning to think you'd never visit, Ender said. Of course not. Do I look like I'd let anything get in the way of my family? And me? I asked, and Ender chuckled. Well, I don't know. When the only person you get to call is everyone other than me, it gets a bit annoying, Ender responded before looking behind me and glaring at Maddox. And he is here because? Ender, we've already made it. Get over it, I said, and Ender gawked at me. What? Mother should have told you, I said. Didn't think anyone would actually be good enough for you, he replied, and I elbowed him in the stomach. Ender groaned, and I laughed. Anyways, let's go inside. I have your things. Since you requested for bullets, I guess you have serious business here. I thought you wouldn't want an entourage to greet you either, so it'll just be me, Ender said, and I nodded my head as we walked towards the pack house. I forced myself not to go on a mouse hunt for my siblings. Considering it was nighttime, they all must have been asleep. Besides, I had a job to do. We walked quickly, with Mikhail silently following us and making small comments here and there while Maddox acted all stoic and weird. He was silent the whole time. However, he has been linking me a few questions about the area. He was rather businesslike, which I preferred at this moment as we had serious issues to attend to. We entered Ender's office, a large space that was fairly simpler than my father's. It was still fairly opulent despite its simplicity. It had sleek black floors, smooth fiberglass tables, a large black fireplace right behind it, and a large window with long black curtains that contrasted with the stark white walls. Here's the order. She got back to me fairly quickly. No questions asked. 2, Ender said as he handed me a sealed silver box. I opened it up and sighed in relief as I found a neat line of bullets, each one lined with a silver outer shell that released the wolfsbane upon firing. Loaded my magazines and strapped on my holster. I placed 2 guns at each hip and secured my magazines into their holders. Is the checkpoint dangerous? Mikhail asked. If it's been looked after, then it shouldn't be. Then again, we're talking about Faustus. I highly doubt that it's left unguarded, I said. Hey Ender, do you still have my extra holsters? I asked. Duh, he said as he threw a set of them at me. I grinned as I slipped them on, attaching more sections of my holster to allow me to carry the knives at my lower thighs. Shall we be off then? Mikhail asked and I nodded. Ender, if anything seems suspicious, take everyone into the inner quarters. I warned and Ender sighed. I'd want more information on what you are going to do, but it seems like you don't have any time left. Leave Blood Moon to me, he said with a reassuring smile. I nodded before turning to Mikhail. Let's go. I guided Mikhail and Maddox through the woods. I had memorized the territory and the path to which I could return to the checkpoint. There was no other way of getting there. There were no indicators to point you to the right track. And you came to memorize this. How? Mikhail asked. If you don't memorize this as a part of the squadron, you can't go home. Was best to memorize the paths, I replied, trying to focus on where I was going. How many times did you go through this forest? Maddox asked me and I shrugged. Countless times. On initiation night, you're supposed to locate the base from an unknown location. By that time, they should have trained you to be able to survive. Finding the base can take a few hours to a few days and some don't make it. It's survival of the fittest and a method of eliminating the failures, I explained. What happens to those who fail? Mikhail asked in an amused tone. Didn't surprise me though. He looked kind, but he was also a total asshole. But that was just my opinion. Failures are left to die. They decompose almost instantly. We're spellbound to our leader during the initiation. Those that fail disappear. Have you ever known anyone who's failed the initiation? Maddox asked as we slowly walked, getting closer to the checkpoint. I've never really cared. I have a cousin who failed it, I said. Eleanor's daughter, Mikhail said right after. I stopped in my tracks and turned. You know her? I asked. I heard of her, he said with a grin. Curious. Of course, I replied. I heard that her mother, Eleanor, had a mate who died soon after the child was born. Eleanor was superstitious enough to believe it was her daughter who caused her loss. Seeking solace in the world of witches, she crossed paths with Faustus, Mikhail said. That should be enough for now. Shall we keep moving? I rolled my eyes before turning again and continuing to walk. Was she your cousin? Maddox asked me. Her name was Camille. Last time I saw her was 3 weeks before my initiation. She never returned from hers, I responded before finally reaching the checkpoint. It was a rocky area, and the rugged terrain allowed for some intense mountain climbing regimen. Training for that type of shit was difficult. It cost us broken bones and twisted ankles more than we can remember. We left them to heal overnight. Oh, the perks of being a werewolf. Well, of once being a werewolf. There's a system of caverns that we can enter from there, I said as I pointed to a cave opening. No wonder we couldn't track them down, Maddox said. It was our temporary home until we were called back, I explained. Seems like it's empty, Mikhail said as he pulled out a sleek silver gun. Nodded as we walk up the steep path going to the cave opening. Can't smell anyone either, Maddox added. I can't sense anything. It's probably empty. No one other than me was supposed to return after the full moon banquet in Blood Moon. The rest were to follow in 3 months. And why is that? Mikhail asked. I was the squadron leader. I was the only one who knows the way to get to the base, I informed them. Now without my werewolf senses, I had to rely on the damned magic coursing through my veins. I felt every little thing that moved. I stayed sensitive to everything and felt the slightest of movements. Stop for a moment, I said, and we all froze. I closed my eyes and paid attention to the inside of the cave. Something was dripping, and it didn't have the fluidity of water. Shit. Something's wrong. I quickly made my way into the cave, and a freezing cold immediately wrapped itself around my body. I felt something surge at my fingertips. It reeks of Faustus, Mikhail said as he pulled the slide on his gun. It reeks of death, Maddox added. That is, of course, what Faustus usually reeks of, Mikhail chuckled. What is your relationship to Faustus? Maddox asked. He's Faustus' brother, I said, and Mikhail smirked at me. Well then, little wolf, Faustus must have confided in you, he said, and I rolled my eyes as we entered the cave. Hellari called me a pawn, a hybrid one. I know what that means. You're her pawn and so is Scar. It's something the leaders of the council do, I said. Just as we arrived at the entrance of the base, a tall wall of rock that we had to climb to get in. The only thing I don't understand is how Faustus is able to create his own pawns. I added as I prepared myself to climb. Maddox offered to help me. I shook my head as I hoisted myself on top of a ledge. There's only one way to get up, so follow me, I said as I continued to climb, gripping onto the cold stone as hard as I can. I see. Well, if you must know, Faustus and I were both brought to Hellari to become her pawns. We're more like knights. Scar and I are sworn to her. And betrayal is never an option. The moment one of us betrays the other, it's open fire, Mikhail said. You are a special case. I climbed onto another rock and finally reached the top. I used my remaining force to push myself up, and I immediately helped Maddox. He grunted as I pulled him up, and Mikhail effortlessly swung up and landed on the ledge. We can continue our talk later. I believe the smell is getting worse, Mikhail said, and Maddox released a growl. Faustus, he said through gritted teeth. Chapter 30. I froze up before closing my eyes. There was a clear sound of a thick liquid dripping blood, I thought to myself. Without a word, I made my way towards the door at the end of the hall. Maddox and Mikhail followed suit. The door was made of solid golden metal. It was heavy and made of intricately designed metalwork that contained etchings of the oath we take as a part of the squadron. The door was sealed with a complex lock system that required a specific combination and method of twisting the knobs. There were 3 identical golden knobs on the door. Each had elaborate filigree designs and a ruby embedded in its center. At the left side of the door was an elaborate lever. I stepped towards it and moved in well-practiced movements. Taking the middle knob into my hands, I felt a strong and strangely powerful aura burst inside. However, I ignored it as I continued moving and twisting it until it clicked 4 times. The now open door unraveled a central area of metal work. It was made of simple silver and gold vines that now fall straight down with the sound of bells singing behind them. It was the sign that you've unlocked the first section, right? I took the middle knob again and turned it 5 times to the right. The central area twisted around and turned the vines of silver around again. Took the lever and pulled it halfway down. 2 loud clicks could be heard as the 2 other knobs pop out for use. Looks complex, Mikhail commented with an amused grin. It is, I said. Maddox meanwhile watched in fascination. I grabbed hold of both knobs at the side and simultaneously twisted them outwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I counted in my head before I stopped. I waited and counted to 20. A soft click, one that could barely even be heard by the human ear, clicked. I pushed my right hand down on the knob and pulled the left knob up. The 2 knobs locked in place, and I sighed as I pressed the middle knob. Secured and embedded itself deep into the door's vines. Metal began to creak against each other, and I stepped back and watched as the twists and turns unfolded the complicated design of the door. Brilliantly designed. It seems Faustus does prepare, Mikhail said with a smirk as the door unlocked. The metal slid away, leaving behind the middle knob standing on a golden stand. He's a fan of puzzles, I said as I walked into the library. The smell of old books was now covered with the stench of rotting flesh and blood. There were no flies, as it was hard for insects to enter when magic sealed the place. On the ground were 7 bodies laying face down in a circular formation on what used to be a plush woven carpet. Each one had etchings on their backs that dripped with blood. Fuck, Maddox cursed as he took out his gun. At the center of the circle was a clean blood-red envelope sealed with black wax. I walked past the bodies and reached over their arms to pick it up. I think you should concern yourselves with the messages on their bodies, Mikhail said. Maddox and I immediately took a look. The little wolf's been broken. The little wolf's been marked. And when her wolf awakens, the master takes his part. That crazy bastard, Maddox cursed. I pressed the right side of my temples with my fingers. Faustus was definitely here, but he's not around anymore, I said as I ripped the envelope open and unveiled its contents. Inside was a silver necklace with a small crystal pendant that carried what looked to be a small flower bud. The flower bud had transparent petals. A yellow tint spread from its base almost like a little flame. Mikhail's eyes widened, and the air was immediately filled with tension. That belongs to Hellari's garden, Mikhail said, and Maddox stared at me. Hellfire, Maddox muttered. What's it for? I asked. It's poisonous, except when it's boiled and concentrated into a liquid. Take just the right amount and it can deliver a strong adrenaline rush. It's like an EpiPen for the magically inclined. Mikhail explained. Taking too little has no effect. Too much and it can destroy the mind. We have to get back to Hellari. That isn't supposed to be here. Maddox began. But I shook my head. I placed the necklace back into the envelope and tucked it into my pocket. We're not done here, I said as I walked towards the doorway we came in through. I ignored the dead bodies as I grabbed hold of the center knob and picked it up. It came off the golden pedestal, which now sank down to the ground. The golden knob felt warm with power in my hands. I knew something was wrong with it. Alynna, I said. Burn. The golden knob warmed up and suddenly burst into flames, and I felt a burst of heat from behind me. Maddox grabbed me and Mikhail ran out of the room. There was a loud explosion before I heard a maniacal laugh from the center of the room. Rememorari min silder. Vren ervan ingyroen vir torneren minister. Faustus' voice said from within the flames before it immediately died down, burning the bodies to ash. Remember, my child, your friends will be useless once you return to me. Always so dramatic, Mikhail said. He's more of a hindrance than we initially thought he was. Hellari will be able to locate him with the information we have and the necklace in your pocket. Then let's head back, I said. It didn't take us long to get back. I felt a bit disappointed with the lack of excitement in tonight's events, but I would rather do that than worry about Blood Moon and my family's safety. Reed greeted me as soon as we came back, and I sighed in relief. How's my favorite guard doing? I asked, and he smirked at me. Good enough. Donna's been asking about you, says you need to come visit the house sometimes, he told me. I'll take her up on that some other time, I said with a smirk. What did you want to talk to me about? Reed asked, and I felt Maddox's presence behind me. Jealous, I mind-linked Maddox. I'm not, he replied. I was wondering if you still have the stuff I left here from my last visit. Think I left it at your desk, I said. I think I still have them. I can have them brought to you later. Is this the new mate? Reed asked, and I nodded. In the flesh, I said as the two men shook hands. Nice meeting the Macabre Alpha, Reed greeted. Reed cleared his throat before speaking again. I'll have your things sent to you later. I think Ender wants a report of tonight. Besides, you two must be tired. Very, I said before saying our goodbyes. Maddox quickly led me to the guest room. I'm exhausted, Maddox said as he lay down on the bed. I took off my holster and laid it on the empty nightstand. Where'd Mikhail run off to? I asked, and Maddox ignored my question as he dragged me into the bed by my hand. Can we just sleep? He asked. I'm asking because he can contact Hellari, not because I'm worried, I said as I lay down and turned to face Maddox. He's probably going around. Scar and Mikhail never sleep. They have the task of watching over everything and anything Hellari tells them to. He won't rest tonight. I said as I watched Maddox's eyelids grow heavy with fatigue. We'll get rid of him, Maddox murmured, and I smiled. We will, I said, knowing he meant Faustus. I pressed a soft kiss against Maddox's lips, and he smiled before taking me deeper into his arms. Blood. There was blood everywhere. I was covered in it. Bodies littered the floor I walked on, and I felt nothing. There was nothing to be felt. A hand touched my right shoulder, and I immediately turned and aimed my gun at the man behind me. He smiled proudly at me. You've done well, Hilaire, he said, and I tucked my gun away. How long has she gone without the wolf? He asked the woman behind him. 2 months, the woman responded. She looked familiar with her blonde hair and blue eyes. Eleanor, you're distracting her. She hasn't had enough hellfire. She'll remember you in an instant at this rate, the man said. Faustus, she's hardly able to figure out who you are. That does not mean we can be lenient. The man, Faustus, yelled, and the woman, Eleanor, grinned. How long do you want her subconscious to remain? Eleanor asked. It would be boring to remove it. Let her believe she can change her fate. The damage has been done. Having a brief moment of rebelliousness may provide me some entertainment before she serves her purpose, Faustus said. Tell me, Hilaire, how well can you wield your own powers now? I glanced at the dead bodies around me, and without a word the bodies reanimated. They raised covered in their own blood, and I used a quick move of my hand. The blood on their bodies seemed to be absorbed back into their flesh. Each one was like the perfect human doll, almost as if they were alive. Without a word, I commanded them to kneel before me. Every single one of them stepped forward and kneeled, their heads bowed down. Faustus smiled proudly. Very good. I woke up. A cold sweat covered my forehead, and my breathing had gone ragged. I looked to my left and sighed in relief when I found Maddox calmly asleep. Silently, I crept out of the bed and checked the time on my phone. It was 5:30 a.m. I stretched my arms out before going to the bathroom and taking a quick shower. The running water left relief in its wake, and I felt myself relax. I pressed my head against the cold shower wall. There was a time when I could shut down all my thoughts and emotion, a time when it was necessary. I released a long and deep breath. I touched the mark on my neck. Let her believe she can change her fate, I remembered Faustus said. It wasn't a dream. I was there. That was the first time I had ever gone for a hunt. The first time I woke up with no memory of wiping out the bodies all around me. I looked down at my fingertips. They had already begun to look like prunes, telling me that I'd been thinking in the shower for way too long. Quickly washed my body before leaving the shower. Towel tightly wrapped around my body, I looked into the mirror. With a move of my right hand, the mist all around me dissipated quickly. I picked up my used clothes and took out the envelope. Reaching for the necklace, I carefully examined the little flower. I needed my memories, the subconscious Faustus locked away, and the demon she says she carried. Hilaire, Maddox called, and I shook away my thoughts. Almost done, I said as I put the necklace back into the envelope and made my way out. I quickly slipped into a military green long-sleeved shirt and a pair of black cargo jeans. I strapped my holster on and tied my damp hair into a loose bun. Maddox came to me and pressed a soft kiss on my lips. What woke you so early? He asked, and I shook my head. Nothing. I can tell that you're lying, he said, concerned. A bad dream. I'll tell you about it later, I told him as I trailed my finger down the ridges and curves on his chest. Maddox cupped my cheek with his left hand and pulled us together. A light knock on the door has Maddox growling, and I laughed at him. Hilaire? A familiar voice asked. I was Wesley's. I smiled as I walked over to the door and opened it. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. There was no one there. I turned to Maddox. I'm not in a fucking horror movie, and you heard that, right? I asked, and Maddox nodded. I took the gun to my right out of the holster. There was something very, very wrong here. I need everyone searching the borders. No one gets in or out, Ender yelled. Maddox and I immediately walked out into the lobby, and I watched a section by section of Blood Moon's security groups headed out. What the hell is going on? I asked, and Ender faced me, swallowing a hard lump in his throat. A loud sob came from the door, and I saw my father embracing Mom. I walked over to them and saw my mother falling apart while screaming a name. Celine ran down the stairs in a panic. I felt my body grow numb as the name registered in my mind. Wesley's gone missing. Chapter 31. Take the section heading to the southern border. I'll go with Maddox and oversee things from the East River. Ender, you have to handle things here. I can't contact you through the mind link, so keep your phone on you at all times, I said, and Ender nodded. I want everyone to be on high guard. All the trackers will be dispatched in different directions. The moment you pick up on someone's scent, inform the rest of us, my father ordered. The other pack leaders quickly dispatched their troops, and we were now left with my father, Maddox, Ender, and Vaughn. I nervously played with my right pinky, pinching it harder and harder until the little finger turned red. Maddox took hold of my left hand to stop me, and I pulled away from his touch. Calm down, Hilaire. We'll find him, my father said, and I shook my head. We don't even know who or what we're dealing with, I snapped. We'll find him, my father repeated, almost as if he was chanting a mantra. What makes you so sure? I asked. Because we were able to find you, he yelled, and I felt the authority from his wolf. Everyone froze, including Maddox. My father was never one to get angry, but I was never one to succumb to an alpha's orders. What? I asked. Ender, would you make sure the door is shut? Vaughn, go fetch your mother. We weren't supposed to let you know about it, my mother said, her voice shaking. Her face had turned beet red, and whatever grace I knew her to have seemed to crumble and fall apart in front of me. We were seated in the conference room, a large open space with only a large glass-encased map of our territory. I sat on a plain black stool in front of my mother while Maddox tried to soothe me by rubbing circles down my back. Had my hands in my hair, elbows lying on my thighs, and my mind was a mess of emotions. You went missing 18 years ago without a trace for the first time. My mother continued. Eleanor brought you back that night, but you were so distant we didn't know what to do. Eleanor told me it was because you saw a rogue and that you would be better off preparing to be an alpha with her. She said that you would be more ready to face things like that with more exposure. You let her take me? I interrupted her, my voice slowly rising. We did, my father answered for her. You have to understand. Eleanor lost her mate just a few weeks before Camille was born. Camille was sickly and Eleanor needed someone reliable to run her squadrons. I stood up abruptly and walked away. So you thought it would have been better to send your own eldest daughter into something you two had no idea about? I asked, the tone of my voice turned colder and louder with every word. Do you have any idea what happens in the squadron? My mother sobbed and I shook my head. Did I disappear without a trace? I asked and my mother nodded. Not a single one. I bit my bottom lip. I can't do this right now. We can speak about this later. Wesley's life could very well be in danger. I have no time for this shit, I heard myself say as I walked out of the conference room. I didn't process or think about anything. I was focused on finding Wesley. I heard Maddox call from behind me, but I couldn't listen to anyone trying to comfort me right now. I wasn't going to let Wesley go through what I had. I wasn't going to let Faustus damage my family any further when they were the only ones I held on to. I sprinted through the forest. I knew Maddox was trying to get in my head, but I blocked him off. Wesley was all that mattered right now. You know where to find me, Faustus' voice rang through my head and I stopped. I heard the sound of paws coming from behind me and found Maddox there in his wolf form. He came towards me and I closed my eyes. I felt a pull towards my left and immediately made a run for it. Maddox followed closely behind me. We arrived at the cave for the blood moon checkpoint. Maddox barked, knowing full well that he would never be able to climb the wall in his current form. Have any clothes with you? I asked. Maddox's wolf barked at me before running off into the woods. He came back a few minutes later, and I nodded as we made our way into the cave. Maddox followed me silently as we climbed the wall. Took me half as much time to get up as I did before. When I arrived at the top, I felt the heaviness in the air. I heard sobbing from the inner room and my breath stopped. I walked straight into the inner room. The door was still unlocked and I could feel the cold seep into my skin. Oh, look, Wesley. It's your dear elder sister, Faustus greeted with a sinister smile. Wesley was strapped onto a slab of marble. The dead bodies that we'd left behind were now lying at the foot of the stone in a strange circle arrangement. Wesley had a cloth wrapped tightly around his mouth. He looked at me and I felt my heart sink. I heard Maddox growl and Faustus grinned. I immediately took my gun out and fired, but Faustus dodged the bullet. Instead, the bullet hit the wall. Oh dear, Faustus said with an amused look on his face. I wouldn't try to kill me if I were you. Your brother's life rests in my very hands. You're so full of shit, I said as I fired again. I've missed that foul mouth of yours. Quite a change from the usual silent mouthed servants we get in the Sentinels nowadays. You already took me, so why are you taking my brother? I asked. I'm not taking him anywhere. I just needed a bit of blood. I've already drawn it from him, Faustus said as he lifted up a small vial of red liquid. Did you know that hellfire can increase its toxicity when placed in werewolf blood? I felt the mark on my neck slowly burn, and Faustus' smile grew even wider. My body froze and I felt as if the control I had over my body was being pushed out and suspended away, as if I wasn't me. I'm glad you two made it. It took me quite some time to figure out how to get rid of Mikhail. He can be quite a pest, but a few traces of dear Aunt Eleanor. Here and there, a bit of blood, and some dead children tend to get poor Hilary's attention, Faustus said, and I felt the tension in the air rising. My blood boiled and I felt my anger surge through the air. Oh, don't be so mean, Alaire. I did teach you to be more humorous when dealing with your enemies. After all. Faustus' eyes glowed bright blue as he lifted a finger. Who pet heiress, Faustus said. Come to me. My feet lifted off the ground and my body was pulled towards him. Maddox immediately made a move to grab me, but he was quickly subdued, and I watched as he fell limp to the ground. You are my creation. Alynna, Maddox growled as he struggled to move. You're far too loud. I guess that's why I never found wolves to be too appealing, Faustus said with a smirk as my feet landed on the ground. Good thing I've tucked your little wolf away, Minsilder, Faustus said as he pulled a loose section of my hair behind my ear. What do you want? I asked, struggling to control my voice. Faustus smiled eerily at me. Well, step one was to lure you in with your brother, Faustus said as he averted his gazes at Wesley. Good job, young one. Eleanor was right when she said to take you. You have me now. So let go of him. I felt my voice choke and Faustus turned his gaze back over to me. I preferred you when you were silent, although I am quite grateful for your consciousness. Not having the full amount of power I bestowed upon you meant I can still control you, Faustus explained just as I heard Maddox groan loudly. As he tried to push himself off the ground, Maddox's strained muscles looked like they were ready to explode. Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I can make you feel so much worse, Faustus said, and I felt a backbreaking sensation on my spine. Maddox, stop, I said in pain, and Maddox screamed before he stopped. Watched as his body fell flat on the ground once more. Good obedient little pup, Faustus said with a smile. Now then, Liger. Wesley stopped sobbing, and his eyes turned pitch black. Farvel, Ivra and Garen Netru, Faustus said. Forget, you are of no use to me. Now. I watched as Wesley nodded his head slowly. The bindings that strapped him onto the slab became loose, and he stood up. Now then, Wesley, I want you to wait outside. If another person comes up that wall, I want you to run and jump. If your sister or anyone else leaves this room and touches you, I want you to jump as well. Do it head first. It will be less painful that way. I struggled to scream as Wesley made his way out of the room. Faustus grinned widely before reaching into my pocket and pulling out the necklace that I had found. Children do make some of the best toys. But I was beginning to get tired of keeping my older toys away. I find having you, Minsilder, right here so much more of a relief. I couldn't let the alpha have too much fun with my beautiful vessel, Faustus said as he trailed his hand down my cheek. I had the strong urge to pull away, but I couldn't. My body was paralyzed. Now, as I'm getting tired of exerting so much power over such small deeds, Faustus said as he walked over to a nearby table, kicking one of the bodies to the side. I'd like you to sit down on the slab. My body moved on its own and immediately sat down on the marble slab. Watched as Faustus took the necklace and crushed it in his hands. A bit of blood trickled down onto his white suit, and he walked over to Maddox. Tonight, I shall have you, the one and only alpha of the macabre pack, witness your mate for who she really is, Faustus said. Resinai Vulcos. Maddox immediately got up. Maddox's eyes landed on me, and I tried to give him a reassuring gaze. Wanted to tell him that I was going to be fine, but I couldn't. Faustus walked over to me and placed his bloody hand on mine, leaving behind the flower bud of hellfire in my hands. It bloomed in my hand and turned into a crimson-red color. Einra Minsilder, Faustus commanded. Eat my child. My hands moved to plucked a petal. The flower immediately died and turned into a dark black mass in my hands, but the single petal I took turned blood red. Without a word, my hand placed the petal into my mouth. Chapter 32. After the petal of hellfire had fallen onto my tongue, I felt an immense pain coming from my mark. As it began to worsen, Faustus pulled my chin towards him and placed the vial of my brother's blood into my mouth. I felt the liquid touch my tongue and felt the immediate urge to throw it all. I felt sick, and I immediately felt immense rage. Images flashed in my mind of dead bodies, children, gunshots right in between the eyes, and massacres. They were all my doing. I saw visions of myself bathed in the blood of my enemies. I felt the smile that graced my face when I did so, the twisted enjoyment in bathing myself in gore. The initiation night. I remembered it now. I remembered all of it, the night I had to run after my prey in the woods, the initiation that involved me dragging another person into the dungeons of the Sentinel, and the torture that person had to endure before I finally put an end to her life. I recalled the moment when Faustus slit open the poor person's hands and filled a slab of strange lines with her blood. Who was it again? Who did I chase that night? Alynna. Stop. Please. The girl in front of me screamed that night, but I felt nothing as my wolf growled at her. She had blonde hair. And blue eyes. She looked like me. She looked like Aunt Eleanor. Camille. It only registered then that I had been hunting her down. I was supposed to bring her back dead. I remembered her pleas of mercy and pity. I relished in the fear that filled her to her very core. She was weak just as Aunt Eleanor had said. There was no room for weakness in the Sentinels. There was no room for weakness for me. I was brought back to the day I returned to my family. When you return to Bloodmoon, your mate will cross paths with you men. Sildur, Faustus said. I nodded my head. Farvel la vre mori. Forget all your memories. I blinked my eyes open and laughed at my stupidity. Elaire. Maddox yelled from my side, and I looked to him. How ridiculous, I said as I got off the metal slab and walked over to Faustus. I bowed my head. Remeramin Moris, I told Faustus. I remember everything. He smiled widely at me. Welcome back, Sildur. I smirked as I walked over to a nearby mirror. Elaire. Maddox yelled. I turned around and raised a finger to my lips. Maddox's voice seemed to have gotten sucked back into his throat. He was too loud. Honestly, Faustus, sometimes you take far too long to carry out your plans. What were you going to do if I completely forgot about my purpose? I asked as I stared at my reflection. I trusted your fealty, Faustus responded, and I sighed as I looked at my reflection. I turned my neck and spotted the mark on it. Trusted too much, I see, I said as I examined the disgusting mark. You were a bit too rebellious, Faustus commented. I told you to take control over your human emotions. It's quite troubling to have it kept with you. I feared your complete rebellion. You are my best creation. Glad to know, I muttered as I placed my hand on the mark. I felt a tinge of heat from the mark and hovered my hands over it. Maddox screamed of pain and agony. Faustus watched me intently as I finished and closed my hands. The mark on my neck quickly faded away and healed back into its normal bare flesh. Maddox was pulsating with pain and was covered completely in sweat. Poor little pup. Broken little pup? I sang softly as I made my way over to Maddox. His owner loves him so. His owner leaves him so. I turned Maddox over. Poor little Alpha, sad and all alone. I placed my hand on his chest. A black mist left my body and immediately entered Maddox. The haze caused his veins to rise and revealed a mark of pitch black traveling up to the mark I left on his neck. Just then I heard a scream from outside the door. Was that Wesley? I asked Faustus. None other than, he responded, and I reached up into the air with my right hand and formed a quick fist. Faustus gasped as I pulled my fist down. I told you not to involve him, didn't I? I said through gritted teeth. It was only a temporary means of getting your attention. No harm done, Faustus said. Renarv Reno Pier, I said, and I felt Faustus wheeled over my brother Wayne. I saw 3 figures outside and immediately recognized them. How troublesome, I muttered. I turned around and looked at the dead bodies on the floor before glancing at Maddox. I raised my left hand in the direction of the dead bodies and watched as they began to reanimate. Their eyes looked dead and empty as they were replaced by pitch black colors. Make them busy, I ordered softly as the bodies slowly got up. Hillary and her 2 servants made their way towards me. Elaire, stop. Wake up, Hillary yelled, and I smirked. I'm already awake, I said, as I circled my right hand around the floor. A black mist grew from the ground, and I was filled with glee as Mikhail and Scar realized what I had done. Wesley lay in Mikhail's arms and I sighed. He'll be fine, I thought to myself before I allowed the mist to swallow up Maddox, Faustus and myself, leaving Hillary and the rest of them behind. We arrived at Faustus' home, also known as the Sentinel's base. It was reminiscent of an old Victorian house. It was completely cold and dark. The moon's dim white light illuminated the hall. The place was decorated with furniture that looked as if it jumped out of a French chateau, but the dim light made everything look dull and gray. Vili and Aikster, 2 squadron leaders, greeted at the same time. Welcome, sir. I recognized them immediately, and their eyes widened as they bowed their heads in respect. Extra Elaire. We did not expect your arrival so soon. Each one of them was dressed in black robes. One was female and one was male. The 2 of them were dressed in black. The female is known as Zena, and the male was Quentin. They were part of my squadron and were 2 of my best fighters. We were expecting you 3 more weeks later, Xena commented. Her cropped, platinum and black hair accentuated her bright green eyes. Faustus became impatient, I said as I handed Maddox to them. Maddox's body was lurched forward, and the 2 squadron leaders stared at him. Second quarter dungeons. He's my prey alone, understood. The 2 leaders nodded as they pulled Maddox up. Maddox was completely groggy and limp from the spell cast on his body. Xena and Quentin carried him away, and I turned to face Faustus. Seems you enjoy your little plaything, Faustus said as he traced his right hand down my cheek. Toys are meant for breaking and playtime is over, I said as I look out the tall windows. Would you like to meet your new squadron? Faustus asked, and I shook my head. I can do that tomorrow. I'll call if and when I need you, I said as I turned on my heel and left. Faustus walked in the opposite direction. I sighed as I walked forward, remembering the right halls and turns to get to my room. I ran into a few other Sentinel squadron members, and each of them bowed their heads in respect. I had to climb up several flights of stairs before I made it into my room. Grand bedroom tucked at the end of a dark, almost abysmal-like hallway. Found its double doors and quickly entered the room. The room was dark and its walls were made of thick black stone. I checked the windows. There was nothing outside, just a plain black abyss as the moon lit whatever areas it can. There was a clean bed covered in blood-red sheets and pillows. The bed frame was an old canopy bed made of bronze with intricate vine details in the pillars and a large heavy black curtain hanging above it. The thick wooden floor was covered in expensive woven carpets. There was a dead fireplace to help provide warmth, an empty vanity, and a door leading to the bathroom. As I was about to enter the bathroom, 2 soft knocks sounded on my door and I opened it in silence. In front of me was Aunt Eleanor, her hair tied up in an elegant bun and her piercing blue eyes held a cold glow to them. Hello, Alaire, she greeted with an icy smile. Chapter 33. Aunt Eleanor was the exact image of my mother if not for the harsh, cold look in her deep blue eyes and the stiffness with which she carried her actions. May I come in? She asked, and I nodded my head. I let her walk into the room and took a seat on the edge of my bed. I guess you came here for a reason, I said as I waved my hand towards the door. It shut itself and I crossed my legs. Has everything come back to you? She asked, and I tilted my head. Of course, I said as I stood up and approached her. I've done you proud. And now I'm worth far more than you ever thought I would be. She smirked at me before taking a loose hair from my face and twirling it between her 2 fingers. Faustus wants you to sit with him at the assembly tomorrow. The Sentinels await your presence, Aunt Eleanor said. I'll be there, I replied as I flicked my finger towards the door. It opened quickly, and Aunt Eleanor bowed her head slightly before leaving me alone to my thoughts. I shut the door and made my way to the bathroom. It was fairly large and the elevated white tub covered in gray stone sat by the windows. The water began to fill it up and I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The Gothic setting of the castle was suitable for what it was. From what I heard and read, the castle was once Hilari's home overtaken by the Sentinels. I stripped out of the clothes and set my gun aside. I stared at my reflection for a while. My neck was clear of any mark that Maddox had given me. My eyes had turned almost indigo, and my face had turned paler. I turned around and looked at the back of my neck. Instead of the scowl, there was a collection of intricately placed welts on my skin. They were scars that marked my back with etchings of words from the initiation and countless nights of sacrifices and killings. I was marked by the Sentinels, and there was no escaping that. I had murdered children and families, and with that came the guilt that would burden me forever. But the Sentinels turned that into something else. They made you desensitized, but more than that, they made you feel like it was the right thing to do. They made us believe that if you didn't kill them, they would kill you. If you didn't value your life, they'd kill whatever you valued or take away whatever humanity was left inside you. I tore my gaze away and went up the small steps into the tub. I took a dip and sighed in relief as the warm water wrapped around my flesh. I stared out the windows and into the darkness. Maddox was going to die if I left him here. There was no food for prisoners, and there was no pity amongst squadron leaders. If I was going to get him out of here, I had to do it fast. I closed my eyes in the tub and sat on the back of my lower legs in a kneeling position. I felt a cold rush of wind blow against my hair. With a quick deep breath, I pulled myself down the water. Voices sounded all around me, muffled and unclear. I opened my eyes and stared into an empty space. I heard another muffled voice in front of me and reached for it, making a fist. With my outstretched right hand, it disappeared into the pitch-black darkness. In front of me, I pulled it back, a pile of mist and dark matter in my grip, and I felt the strain on my lungs. I walked out and made my way towards the closet, pulling on a thick black robe. From a nearby hanger, I slipped into a long-sleeved black dress that had a long slit. It was simple and easy to pull on. I walked barefoot as it was easier to sense movement without coverings. Besides, I no longer needed to do my own dirty work. I patted my way out of my room and took a walk. Each member of the Sentinels greeted me respectfully as I walked towards the second quarters. It was quite a long way from my quarters, and when I finally made my way there, it was filled with the noise of a million captured prisoners. There were weeping sounds, wails, and screams of terror all around. As I walked, each cell I passed turned absolutely silent. Maddox would have been locked up at the very bottom. After passing by nearby guards and fellow sentinels whose hands were covered in crimson blood, I finally made it. Most cells required an intricate knowledge of unlocking doors. It assured us that no one would ever make it out alive. If a code was forgotten, the prisoner died. Simple as that. I placed my right hand on the large silver slab that was covered in intricate metalwork. I twisted my hand to the right before having my palm face the ceiling and forming a fist. The door made loud noises of metal sliding against each other until a loud clicking sound was heard. The door opened up with a creaking noise before I spotted Maddox sprawled on the ground. He wasn't chained. It was unnecessary here after all. Light from a small lantern illuminated his almost lifeless body. The door shut behind me, and I watched as Maddox groaned and started to move. "Who's there?" Maddox asked with a harshness to his voice. I didn't respond. The floor was damp and extremely cold. The walls were made of cold stone, and not a single window was available. The sentinels weren't accommodating by any means. The only comfort would be the lantern shining above, illuminating the already dark room. Maddox turned his head, and his eyes immediately locked on mine. He struggled to get on his feet, and I put my right hand up. Maddox managed to get on his knees, and I walked towards him. He stared at me, his amber coal eyes bordering on glaring. "What has he done?" Maddox growled, and I lowered myself as well. "Nothing that hasn't been planned," I told him, and Maddox took a big gulp of air. I reached for his neck, and he didn't budge as I trailed my hand around the bloodied mark that had turned dark from the spell I cast. I closed our distance, and Maddox's breath caught in his throat. Our faces were mere centimeters away from each other. His face looked tired, but his eyes were fierce and rebellious, prepared to fight. It's a type of courage that could get him killed here. In a soft whisper, I uttered 3 words that I knew would break his heart. "Let me go." Maddox's eyebrows narrowed. "No," he growled, a low rumble coming from his chest. I sighed before standing up and walking away from him. "Learn to control your instincts, Cross," I said in an icy tone. I held my left hand out to my side and turned my head to look at him. "I can only do so much until the woman you knew disappears for good." I held my hand in a stiff position, with all 5 fingers curled upwards. A black mist bloomed from the center of my palm. I played with it for a bit, the mist pouring out from my hands and curling around my arm. "You shouldn't eavesdrop on me," I said sternly, and before my eyes landed on the door and I squeezed my hand into a fist, the mist traveled quickly and sharply, whizzing through the air as it went through the edges of the door. I raised my right hand up before pointing upwards with my index finger and making small quick circles in the air. The door opened up and revealed Eleanor, with the mist around her neck. Her voice croaked, the mist making it difficult for her to speak as I choked her. "Crow Ilaire Silia Nianaran," Faustus said as he walked down the stairs. "Calm down, Ilaire, she meant you no harm." Maddox growled, and I glanced back at him. I felt a tinge of heat in my eyes, and the mark on Maddox's body glowed like a coal ember. Maddox groaned in pain, his right hand reaching for the mark before falling to the ground. "We were only making sure you weren't." I stared into Faustus' eyes, stopping him mid-sentence. My eyes narrowed, and Faustus' voice caught in his throat. "You made me into what I am, but I will not let you bark orders at me," I said. as the mist let go of Eleanor's neck, and I stopped my hold over Faustus. I opened my right hand in the same position as before, and the mist made its way back into the palm of my hand. I turned around and faced Maddox. Gefrecht min Vulkos, I said as the mist dissipated into my body. Fight my wolf. I walked over to Maddox and placed my right hand on the mark. Maddox screamed in agony. The power of the mate bond was siphoned out of him like tearing away of someone's soul. It was damage hitting straight into the very core of his body. Maddox's body was strained, veins threatening to pop as the spell destroyed every trace of the bond one could find. They said rejecting your mate is an excruciating process, but forcing it out of one's soul was a different story. Done wrong and it could drive your target to insanity. Maddox's body began to convulse, like a human experiencing a seizure. His body released his pain in shock waves. I released my grip on him and watched as the pain forced him to defend himself. The body twisted and turned. It was a forced shift. Maddox's wolf, black as night, now lay on the ground. We move tomorrow, I said, as I took my eyes away from Maddox. There's no time to waste here, I added as I stand up. Faustus nodded and Eleanor rubbed her throat. You? Because, me? I heard Eleanor mutter under her breath as I passed her. I paused and glared at her. Care to repeat that? I commanded. You are what you are because of me, Eleanor shouted, and I narrowed my eyes at her. I closed my eyes and sighed. You have my gratitude, I said before I placed my right hand on her shoulder. Her eyes turned pitch black for a moment before her body became completely still. Now be good and go upstairs. When you get to your office, lock yourself in until you're summoned to leave. I let go of her and watched as she walked past me and up the steps. I turned around and faced Faustus, who gave me an amused grin. He placed a hand on my waist as he guided me upstairs. Shall we meet the rest? Faustus asked. You act as if I have a choice, I said. You're the first success. The rest of us have been awaiting your awakening since the moment you crossed paths with your mate, Faustus said as we reached the corridor. Then let's not keep them waiting, I said. Chapter 34. We made our way into the meeting room, a large rectangular room with high ceilings. It was ancient and resembled a large library. Other than the illumination of the moon, we have a fireplace that cast a yellow light over the people waiting inside. There were a set of 7 chairs in a circle, but at the very head was a taller one. Each seat was a carefully carved wooden piece with plush seating. At the center of the room was a large inscription, laid in marble, stone and silver on the ground. It glimmered below. The moonlight shone on it constantly by the large round skylight roof. Hilaire Richelieu in the flesh indeed, a man greeted with a wild smile. His eyes were large, and he was dressed in a black outfit like all of us. Everyone here was wearing some sort of leather coat other than Faustus and myself. Marco, I greeted back, and he nodded enthusiastically in his seat. He was a fat old man with a face that always reminded me of a deranged clown without makeup. He was the one that drove people insane, his tactics being more than gruesome. Faustus took a seat to the right of the center, leaving only one more seat for me to take. I made my way through the center and my shadow cut through the light, but it wasn't a distinct silhouette of my figure. Instead it was fuzzy, like mist. I took a seat at the center, crossing one leg over the other. How often is Hilary in Macop's territory? A woman from the further end asked. She's been with them ever since I arrived. I suppose she will have returned there by now, I said. Our squadron leaders have had no problem infiltrating parts of the territory ever since your arrival. There are areas easy to access. I've sent more than a handful as lookouts, another said. Then we are ready, Faustus responded. What about the wolf? Marco asked, and I narrowed my eyes at him. He is to be used to our advantage. He will not disobey. I've made sure of that, I said as I rested my head on my right hand, leaning over my knee. There is one issue, I added, making Faustus raise his brow. What is that? An older man asked. The dagger. It's in the pack house, I informed. Hilary's dagger? The woman asked, and I nodded. Oh dear. I can find it, but I'll need a distraction, I said with a smirk. Of course. Leave that to me, Faustus said with a curt nod. Of what importance is that? Marco asked. It can kill my precious child, Faustus said and paused as he looked at me. Should it fall into the wrong hands, our plan would fall to shambles, and that is something we simply cannot afford. Fortunately, we have its wielder under our control, Faustus said with a smirk. Its wielder? Marco asked, obviously unable to comprehend the dagger's importance. Cardus' only living heir, I answered. The wolf. Everyone's eyes glowed an icy color, revealing their interest. Now that it has been made clear, I said as I uncrossed my legs and leaned back against the chair. Shall we discuss the rest of the plan? Squadron 4 and 5 have been making rounds in the east and west, Marco said. It seems to be the easiest area to sneak in. Cross would have sent his gamma west. It's an easy way in. I suggest going down the hills on the east. The lake will mark your location. The pack will notice your presence there a little too late, I explained. Hillary and her servants are our top priorities. Nevertheless, send orders to kill all on sight, Faustus said. Hillary is mine to deal with. Everyone nodded their head as we continued our discussion. The betrayal. I smirked upon reading the title of the book that I'd picked up, something I had read many times over. It told the tale of Hillary and the Sentinels. In it was the story of two brothers divided by their longing for power. How one brother destroyed the lives of a peaceful family, and how that created a series of events that divided the two brothers forever. It was a story many could not confidently read in front of Faustus. You know the tale already, Faustus said as he paced around my room. Of course, I said with a sigh. Faustus smiled before turning his back towards me and pouring himself a drink from an array of wines that were left in my room earlier. Are you ready? Faustus asked as I heard him pour another glass for me. Of course, I said without hesitation. He turned around with a smile before offering me the wine. I took a sip and so did Faustus. I expect nothing less from you, he said as he tilted my head up, his eye glowing an icy blue color. Of course, I muttered as I watched Faustus nod before taking his glass and walking out the door. I will order the assembly. Do what you must to the wolf, Faustus said before he left. I placed the book down on my bed before exiting the room. I made my way back down to the cellars and unlocked Maddox's cell. It was time. A day had already passed, and the sentinels were ready. Maddox's wolf lay on the ground, breathing silently yet incapable of movement. I touched his head and released a mist into him. His wolf immediately got up. Obediently, his amber eyes replaced by pitch-black orbs. I shut the door in and walked over to Maddox's wolf. I kneeled before him and stared into his eyes. I raised my right arm and pressed my thumb onto his forehead. Closed my eyes. After a few seconds, I released him and Maddox shifted into his human form. The mist wrapped around him like a cloak and covered him from head to toe in a black outfit. I felt a pain on my back as I stared at him. Maddox's eyes were no longer blinking and moving, only a deep void in his dull eyes stared at me. He was ready. I walked out of the cell, and he followed closely beside me as we headed stairs. Faustus grinned at the sight of Maddox before he pulled back a set of curtains and revealed the squadrons we were bringing. Unlike Maddox's pack, there were no words set to raise morale. Each squadron member bowed their head as I walked past them. The 6 high-ranking members stood at the end of each row, and each one wore a proud and mischievous smile. He's T.I.O.P.'er. He's T.I. it, I said aloud. Go with power. Go with purpose. Every single squadron member began to chant the words as darkness enveloped all of us. The forest appeared before me, and the cold breeze blew against my back. My feet came in contact with freshly fallen leaves, and the woods were once again surrounding me and Maddox, who was right behind me. I trust you will do your part, Faustus said from my side. I nodded my head as I walked forward. Feeling Faustus leave my side, Maddox and I made our way towards the pack house. Like a puppet on strings, Maddox followed every move that I made in absolute silence. I heard the muffled noises of growls from my right, knowing full well that the attacks had begun. I was aware of Mikhail and Scar's movements. It was hard not to when they were constantly trying to find me. The pack house was frantic, and with a simple cloaking spell I managed to get inside with Maddox by my side. I closed the door to our room and opened the closet, sighing in relief as I spotted the dagger. I took it in my hands and turned around to face Maddox. I took the blade and aimed it at my chest. I plunged the dagger into my chest, but it was repelled. out of my hand and onto the ground. It was worth a shot, though. I stood up and picked the dagger off the floor. With it I sliced my right wrist, my blood pooling and the blade burning my flesh. I am doing the right thing, I thought to myself as I bit my bottom lip to fight the intense urge to scream. By the time it was done, the silver blade had turned crimson red, and the burned flesh on my wrist slowly faded, healing at an inhuman speed. The large white crystal on its hilt glowed an intense white. I watched as the light faded, and so did the crimson color of the blade. Placing my left hand over Maddox's temple, I released a white light that seeped into his body. I handed Maddox the blade before giving him an intense look. Ivra and it, Hilaire, I told myself before walking out of the room. Maddox grunted before following behind me. The pack house looked empty, but I knew better. Everyone would have been hiding by now, the same way they hid the night Faustus had attacked us. We made our way into the forest in silence, and Maddox, unable to speak to me through the mind link, kept quiet. I felt an electric spark from my right and immediately walked in that direction. It was Hilary without a doubt, and as we reached the dark clearing, it became a certainty. Standing side by side with Maddox, I watched as Hilary emerged from the shadows with Scar and Mikhail by her side. "Hilaire," she called out, and I tilted my head. I glanced over at Maddox and Hilary's eyes followed. What has he done? Nothing that wasn't planned. Faustus appeared to my left, and I walked towards him. Faustus took hold of my left wrist, and I felt my strength being drained away from me. "You took her as a vessel?" Hilary asked, and I watched as Mikhail's eyes revealed his concern. Scar stared directly at me, and I gave him a cold stare. "I made her powerful the way you should have made me," Faustus roared as the blood boiled under my skin. I closed my eyes and felt a burning sensation course through me. Faustus charged a large surge of energy from his body to mine, and I could feel the adrenaline from it. I raised my right hand so that it faced towards Hilary's direction and waved my hand to the right. Black mist rose from the ground and drew a line separating Faustus and me from Hilary. Maddox stood stiffly behind me, and Hilary raised her own hand, and a rush of dark wisps hurled its way towards Faustus. Faustus smiled as he released me, and the surge of adrenaline coursed through me, causing me to find some sort of release. I fell to my knees, a powerful wind surrounding me as I repelled Hilary's attack. Hilary walked forward, trying to cross the line, but I balled my right hand into a fist, and it intensified, making her take a step back. Faustus smirked as he walked over to Maddox. From the corner of my eye I saw Faustus take Maddox onto his knees. "Destiny is a fool's belief," Faustus said with a smile on his face. "And you're the fool," Hilary said as her eyes turned a blood-red color. Hilary walked forward, and I watched as a trail of blood slipped from the corner of her mouth. A drop fell onto the ground, and the mist disappeared, recoiling in various directions. Mikhail and Scar nodded at each other before taking out their daggers. Faustus grinned as Mikhail stepped forward. Mikhail immediately hurled one dagger at Faustus' direction, and Faustus dodged it in an almost effortless fashion. I stared at Hilary and placed my palms on the ground. Releasing the strength Faustus has redirected into me, I hurled it towards Hilary. I felt the power struggle between us. The sheer amount of strength I had to use to push forward and reach her sent a burning sensation down my back. Scar sprinted towards Faustus, and they fought hand to hand. "You're feeding her?" Hilary asked as she exerted more power. "How else could I control her?" Faustus replied with a maniacal grin, and Hilary stared at me. The blood collected in my throat, and I could taste it as pooled in my mouth. "You feed her too much and you lose power," Hilary said with a smile. "There are countermeasures to that," Faustus replied and turned to face me. "Ivra free," I said as I coughed out blood. "I grant you your freedom." Maddox flinched beside me, and I immediately released everything Faustus had stored inside me. My blood felt like it was threatening to burn me whole. Hilary recoiled, and a mist surrounded her in a protective, almost bubble-like nature. Upon release, a dark mist covered Maddox and me. Faustus' shadow was visible, but he could not hear us. I turned to Maddox and traced my hand against his face. "It's time," I said as the mist disappeared, and I let go of him. Both Mikhail and Scar managed to survive, but the burns on their faces placed them in an unconscious state. I watched as their eyes quickly began to dilate, and the two of them woke up. Faustus smiled in triumph as I stood from the ground. I turned to find Maddox, safe and standing as frozen as he possibly could. Hilary revealed herself from the mist, and her eyes trailed from Faustus to me and to Maddox. As Faustus focused on the little show, I lifted my right hand quickly with my palm facing the sky and immediately pulled it back, balling my fist. Faustus' eyes widened as the shadows surrounded his legs and crippled him. The sound of his bones breaking mingled with his scream of agony as he fell. I draw more of his force into me, connecting Faustus and me together, yet numbing the pain. Our souls linked, his life and mine, and our bodies remained separated. There was only one thing left to do. 1,000 voices screamed in my head, 1,000 dead, 1,000 broken. Poor little pup, broken little pup. I heard them taunt. Hilaire, Hilary screamed, but I already knew what was going on. You bitch, Faustus cursed. You, he began, but I didn't let him finish. I'm sorry, I said with a sad smile as I turned to face Hilary. Could feel Faustus' power surge through me, and I smiled. You bound me with your soul. Looked over at Faustus, who now lay on the ground. I will not let you end me this way, Faustus growled as I faced Maddox. You fool. We cannot die. He is in love with you. It's a bond Hilary had secured to him the moment she placed the scowl in your damned body. I ignored him. Standing in front of Maddox, I pulled the dagger out from Maddox's hand and stared at it. Hilary launched a heavy mist that was pointed towards me in an attempt to take it away. No, Hilary screamed, and I gave her a sad smile. I placed the dagger in Maddox's hand, and the white light I placed into Maddox's soul traveled to his eyes.